Hi guys, so today we're learning about the different families of instruments, how the instruments work, what categorizes those instruments into certain families, and that kind of stuff. So first of all, there are four main instrument families. They are percussion, woodwind, brass, and string. And so we're going to dive a little further into those four families of instruments, but just know that those are the four main ones, and you should be able to, by the end of this video, identify different instruments in each family and explain why they fit into that family. So the percussion family is usually played by striking something with a stick or a mallet or with your hand, and sometimes you don't even have to hit something. It can just be something you play without using air. For example, a maraca. I don't hit this to play a sound. I guess I could, but I can just shake it and it makes a sound. But it's percussion because it doesn't use air and it doesn't have strings. There are lots of types of mallets and sticks that you can use to hit instruments with. As you can see, we have a ton. And they're all used for different types of instruments. So we have hard ones like these that might be used for bells or xylophone. Softer ones like these that might be used for like a marimba. Just regular wooden drumsticks, so used for mostly your snare drum, your toms, things like that. And then you got softer yarn ones that can be used for things like your timpani, and then larger versions of this that can be used for things like your concert bass drum. So over here in the back of the band room, we have all these instruments that look like keyboards. Some of them have covers on them, but they all generally look like this. So this one is called a vibraphone. It's made out of metal. It has these metal tubes underneath, and it also has a little felt bar right here that is controlled by a pedal on the bottom. So if I press the pedal, the felt piece moves up and down, making it either ring or not ring. So if I have the pedal up, it's not going to ring, but if I press the pedal down, the sound rings out. Now, this is something that's pretty exclusive to vibraphones or something like chimes over there. It works just like piano. But some of these other ones, for example, this xylophone, this marimba, this is also marimba, they all are made of wood and they don't have pedals. They just resonate on their own and they produce a little bit of a different sound, but all of them are pitched. We also have back here a synthesizer, which is just an electronic piano. We have this, which is called a glockenspiel, also known as just bells, and it is a very high-pitched metal percussion instrument that you may notice does not have any tubes underneath it, and it's a very high-pitched ding. And ones like this, like a xylophone, they do have the tubes underneath, but they still make a crisp, light sound, and they're made out of wood as well. So all of these percussion instruments work differently, but they're all pitched and they all have keys just like a piano. Back in the corner, we may have some instruments that seem a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. We have some things that may be just auxiliary and only needed for certain pieces of music. For example, we have these brake drums, which are, yes, brake drums from like a car, and they make this abrupt, loud sound, but they are used in music a lot of the time. We have the gong and the bass drum, which I said earlier use these giant mallets to hit them, and they both make very deep sounds. They're very large instruments, and usually they require some sort of player to mute the sound because of how deep and resonant it is. Then we have other things like our wind chimes, which are what make you sound like you're having a flashback. And then just different versions of cymbals, which we'll talk about in just a second. These drums right here are called congas. They're very similar to bongos, if you know what bongos are. And they're kind of one of the main examples of drums that you would play with your hands. So instead of using a stick on these, you would use your hands. And there are multiple versions of congas that are different sizes. You can tell that this one is bigger and this one is smaller. So this one makes a lower pitch than this one. So bigger instruments, bigger drums are going to make a lower pitch than higher ones. We also have this whole rack of just random auxiliary things that are used for different pieces, and each one serves a purpose, and most of them are not required to be struck by something. A lot of them are things you can shake in your hand or play with your hands, and you don't need a stick or a mallet. These drums back here in the corner, you've seen them in class, are called timpani. And timpani are one of the best examples to show pitched drums, because drums can have pitches. These not only have different size drums to have different pitches, but they also have this mechanism with a pedal that tightens rods inside that you can kind of see through the top. So if I play this drum all the way loose, it sounds like that. But if I press this pedal with my foot, it tightens the drum head just a little bit. And I can make the pitch change up and down. And all four of these drums have different starting pitches and then can go to different levels of high pitches or low pitches, and are used and tuned differently for every piece of music you play. Lastly, we have the drum set, which has all of these different parts to it, and they are all versions. It's like a combined percussion section together, right? We have this cymbal here, which is called a hi-hat. A hi-hat has a pedal, and then it has two cymbals closely stacked on top of each other. So if I want to press down on the pedal, the cymbals close. And so I can make different sounds by keeping the pedal open or closed. And it makes different sounds. We have this cymbal, which is just called a crash cymbal, so it makes a loud crash sound. And then we have this cymbal over here, which is called a ride cymbal. And a ride cymbal is just kind of a smooth sound. We have these drums right here, which are red. They're not red on every drum set. These are just the heads we have on them right now. But these are called toms. And they all make different sounds. They're different pitches. And toms can be used for cool, different fills and cool moments in songs, or sometimes you can play them simultaneously with other things, just to add a little extra depth. Then we have this drum right here. This is called a bass drum or a kick drum, and it's called a kick drum because you use your foot on a pedal that creates the sound. It's different than a concert bass drum because with a concert bass drum you use a mallet. With this one, you just use your foot. And then lastly, we have the snare drum. I showed in class before, I think, the bottom of a snare drum, which has these little metal things. That's why it's called a snare drum. These things are called snares, and they vibrate against the drum head while you play, which produces kind of a vibration sound as you play the instrument. And if I turn the snares off, where they're not tight and touching the bottom of the drum, it sounds different. The next family of instruments we're going to talk about is the brass family. So the brass family is played by vibrating your lips inside a cup-shaped mouthpiece. This is a trumpet mouthpiece. It's pretty small, so I'm sure you can imagine a tuba mouthpiece or a baritone mouthpiece is a lot bigger around than this and a lot deeper of a cup, but they look just the same. So I would play by vibrating my lips inside this mouthpiece, and a sound would come out and vibrate through the instrument. One thing that is special about brass instruments is that all of them are made of metal. There are some that are made out of plastic, but they're not very good quality. So we'll say they're all made out of metal. And it sends air, when you vibrate your lips, through a series of holes and tubes inside the instrument. So you see all these tubes. What you can't see is on the inside, there are holes that line up with all of the tubes. So when you blow your air through the instrument and you vibrate your lips through the cup, it travels through the series of holes and tubes and then comes all the way out this end, which is called the bell. Most trumpets and euphoniums and tubas have these type of valves. They're piston type valves that go up and down. So I just pulled out the valve to see the inside. When I press this up and down, that mechanism inside goes up and down and lines up with these tubes. And then sometimes instruments, there are trumpets that have them, there are euphoniums that have them, there are tubas that have them. Some instruments have things that are not pistons, they don't go up and down, they have these rotors. So when you press them, they spin around. So French horn has that. Euphoniums can have that, tubas can have that, and there are some versions of trumpets that have that. So we have two types of keys. We have pistons that move up and down, and we have we have rotors that rotate. There's only one instrument in the brass family that doesn't have either of those things, and that is called the trombone. The trombone doesn't have valves or pistons or rotors because it has a long slide that changes pitches. So the longer you extend the slide, the longer you're making your instrument and the lower pitches you can hit. So trombone is the only exception to that. All the other brass instruments, except for maybe like a bugle, which is the early version of a trumpet, have valves or have rotors, and they all have these tubes that can move and can change pitches on your instrument. They have slides that move in and out, and they all do different things. But that is the brass family. It has a lot of stuff about it, which is pretty cool. A few examples of the brass family instruments could be the trumpet, which I showed you, the euphonium, which is a little bit bigger, it's like a baby tuba, the tuba, which is really big, the French horn, which I showed you, and the trombone. Those are ones you normally see in a concert band or in an orchestra. The next family of instruments is the woodwind family. And most of the woodwind instruments are played by vibrating a little sliver of wood that looks like this. It's very thin, called a reed, against the mouthpiece of the instrument. So this is a clarinet mouthpiece. I would place this reed right against the inside of the mouthpiece. And then when I go to play the instrument, I would just blow air against this reed, and it would cause it to vibrate against this mouthpiece and produce sound. It sounds bad off the instrument, but that's how it works. There's one instrument in this family that does not have that little piece of wood, the reed, and that is the flute. The flute is played by blowing air across this hole, kind of like you would with a bottle or a straw. And it also has a characteristic that sets it apart from the others. So most of the woodwind instruments are made out of wood or plastic. So a clarinet is made out of wood or plastic. An oboe is made out of wood or plastic. A bassoon is made out of wood or plastic. The flute, however, is not made out of wood or plastic. It's made out of metal. And so a lot of people might say this is a brass instrument because it's made out of metal, but it's not, because it doesn't have the cup-shaped mouthpiece that brass instruments have. That's one thing that separates the flute from a brass instrument. The other instrument that is not made of wood or plastic is the saxophone. It's made out of metal and it's gold just like most of the brass instruments, but because it has a mouthpiece like this, because it uses a reed, it is not a brass instrument. Most of the woodwind instruments have a lot of buttons. They have buttons like this flute that cover holes, and then some of them have open holes like the clarinet that you cover with your fingers, and that way air doesn't leak out and you can create different pitches. It's very similar to the instrument you guys learned in elementary school, the recorder. You would cover these holes, and the more holes you cover, the pitches change. So that's how woodwind instruments work. There are a lot of instruments in the woodwind family. Some of them use double reeds that are two pieces of wood back to back. So the single reed I just showed you, it's on the mouthpiece now, is very thin, but it's just one slip of wood. A double reed, this is a reed for an oboe, so the bassoon ones are a little bigger, are two pieces of wood smashed together with a tiny hole on top, and you would put your lips around it and blow into it, and it would create a vibration. So the two double reed instruments are oboe and bassoon, but the woodwind family has a lot more instruments. So the woodwind family has the flute, it has the clarinet, which has multiple versions. There's a bass clarinet, there's an alto clarinet, there's a smaller soprano clarinet. We have the saxophone, which has multiple versions of it. There's a soprano saxophone, an alto saxophone, a tenor saxophone, a bari saxophone, and they can even keep going to like contrabass saxophone. There's many of them. We have bassoon, which has multiple versions. There's regular bassoon, there's contrabass bassoon, And then we have oboe, which there's only a couple versions of. There's also the English horn, which is a version kind of the oboe, but it has a longer piece. It kind of is like a mashup between a bassoon and an oboe. So there are a lot of instruments in the woodwind family, and they all work a little bit differently. So the thing about woodwinds is you have to set them apart from the other instrument families to identify them as woodwinds, because they're all so different. The last family we haven't gone over is the string family. And the string family is really any instrument that is played by using strings. So even though we talk a lot about the violin, the viola, the cello, the double bass, anything from a guitar, a banjo, a lute, a harp, all of those are string instruments because you play them by playing the strings. But for now, we're going to talk about the ones that we have here in the band room. So we have right here a violin. And most of the string instruments, some of them are strummed, but most of them are played by being plucked, so plucking the strings, or bowed with a bow. So a bow is a long stick that is made out of wood or sometimes plastic. And it has this part right here. And a lot of times this is made out of either synthetic hair or sometimes horsehair. And this is tightened up and covered in this sticky friction creating substance called rosin. And then you would use this against the strings of the instrument and it would create friction and make a sound. Most string instruments that use bows are used in an orchestra, or sometimes, like if you listen to country music, you have a fiddle, which is the same thing as a violin. It's just a different technique of playing. But most often, you guys are going to be exposed to things like the guitar and the bass guitar and your music that you listen to regularly, like pop or country or rock. Those are the main string instruments that we see in our day-to-day lives. The last instrument that is left, and I can show you this one day in class, it just takes a long time to take apart, is the piano. And the thing about the piano that's interesting is that it's not necessarily one family, even though a lot of people like to categorize it as one or the other. The inside of a piano has strings, and that's what makes the sound. But the sound happens by us pressing a key, which engages a little hammer that smacks the string. So it kind of has components of a string instrument, but it also has components of a percussion instrument. So it floats a little bit between both of those. So you could call it either, or you could call it both.